Welcome to the Wife Stories YouTube channel. New video every day, and don't forget to subscribe. Here we go.
I still remember the exact moment I realized I was nobody in her eyes. We were standing at a loud party in downtown Chicago. It was supposed to be a simple office event, one of those gatherings where men in tired suits talk about the same budgets and business strategies they've been recycling for years. The air was thick with artificial cheer, the murmur of countless trivial conversations layered over the clinking of glasses. I stood near the corner, nursing a soda I didn't want, feeling my pulse reverberate in my temples. A stale rumor made the rounds in the small circle next to me. Some half-funny anecdote about a canceled project. The joke was lost before it even reached my ears, but their forced laughter rose around me like distant thunder. Rebecca was on the far side of the room. My wife of so many years I'd started to lose exact count. Dark hair brushed her shoulders. She was deep in conversation with a tall man I'd never seen before, whose laugh seemed too loud, too confident. At first, I thought it was the usual. She was a natural extrovert. Her job demanded networking, and she had always been graceful at it. But then I saw the way she looked at him. It was just a flick of her gaze. Not even a second. But in that fraction of a moment, she turned her eyes across the distance, and I caught a glimmer of something like dismissal. A dismissal of me, of our life, of everything I thought we stood for. It was as if she didn't recognize me standing there. Or worse, she recognized me and considered me unimportant. I felt my heart lurch, and a slow wave of cold traveled down my spine. That was my first taste of being irrelevant. It was a nauseating sensation, as though gravity had shifted and left me weightless. She smiled at the man, angled her body toward him. An unspoken invitation to stay close. My world started spinning, not with anger, yet, but with the creeping dread that something had already slipped away. The rest of the party blurred around me, a haze of voices that rose and fell without any meaning. I stayed for another half hour, maybe more. I made small talk with a coworker, tried to smile politely, tried to rationalize that maybe I was only imagining things, but that look haunted me all the way home. Several days passed with no explanation. If anything, she was quieter than usual, as though preserving her energy for something else, someone else. I was no stranger to the slow fade of intimacy that can happen after decades of marriage, but this was different. Colder. She would glance at her phone, exhale softly, and force a small smile if I looked at her. It felt staged, like she was an actress bored of her role but still performing out of obligation. Nights came and went with little conversation. I told myself I was being paranoid. Then we hit that awkward moment at a family friend's gathering, an anniversary celebration. I remember it clearly. I tried to make light of how long we'd been married. 24 years, I said with some pride, my voice carrying just a bit in the quiet lull of conversation. She pursed her lips and shot me a sideways look. No, she corrected, 25. There was something almost mocking in her tone. My cheeks burned. I mumbled some half-baked apology or joke about losing track. In truth, I had counted precisely. We first got married in the spring of 1999, which made it 24 full years. She insisted it was 25, as though she needed to contradict me. It wasn't even about the numbers. It was about letting me know I was wrong. A tension grew in the small crowd around us, and a few heads turned away politely. We carried on with the rest of the evening, but the silent rift between us felt like an icy crack snaking through the foundation of our home. 6 months before that, I'd had a clue. A message she'd left open on her phone, uncharacteristically careless. It was just a snippet, something about missing our last night together. I confronted her, and she brushed it off as a message from an old friend. Foolishly, I believed her, or at least I convinced myself I did. The truth is, I was busy with work, tethered to the demands of my job, day after day. The uneasy feeling lingered, but I didn't push. I let it grow in the shadows of my mind, because facing it felt like stepping into darkness with no flashlight. One late evening, in that in-between time when you're not sure if you should stay up or go to bed, I checked her laptop. I'm not proud of it. But suspicion has a way of grinding down your moral sense. She'd left it on the table. I told myself I just wanted to see if she had any events to attend the next day. Some scheduling detail. But as soon as I opened the lid, a wave of guilt and anticipation flickered through me. I found the recycle bin nearly full of recently deleted files. When I clicked, half of me hoped to see nothing but old documents or screenshots. Instead, I saw photos. Photos that had no business being there. Photos of her in a hotel room, leaning against a bed, capturing a reflection in a mirror. And next to her, half-dressed, was a man. It wasn't me. He was tall, fit, with short dark hair. I felt my stomach twist. That must have been him. The same man from that office event. She never even bothered to rename the files. They were just random numeric strings. But the images told me everything I needed to know. I don't remember closing the laptop. I just recall staggering toward the bathroom, locking the door, resting my forehead against the cold tile of the wall. My heart hammered so hard I thought it might burst. For a few minutes, I just breathed and tried not to let my thoughts scatter. The kind of rage and hurt that churned in me was unlike anything I'd experienced. It was like a dark well opening under my feet, sucking me in. When I finally emerged, I found myself hollow. She was in the kitchen, reading something on her phone. She didn't look up. I didn't confront her that night. Part of me wanted to fling the laptop in front of her, demand answers, demand she admit every sordid detail. But a stronger part was too stunned, too broken. Maybe it was shame that paralyzed me. I realized I had lost her, or maybe she'd lost me, a long time before. The scariest part was that she didn't even look guilty or anxious. That cold distance she wore so effortlessly had become the backdrop of our marriage. I went to bed early, stared at the dark ceiling, and tried not to remember that man's face. But it kept returning, hovering in front of me with a grin that might have existed only in my head. Finally, I drifted into a shallow sleep around dawn, only to wake to an empty space beside me. She'd left for work without a word. That was the first time I felt anger overshadow my hurt. Something inside me snapped, and I was determined to know everything. Over the next weeks, I watched her phone habits more closely. She'd excuse herself for calls. She'd leave the room sometimes and disappear for minutes that stretched into an hour. Once, I found her texting late at night in the bathroom, and she tried to pretend she'd had insomnia. I recognized the slow unraveling, like a thread being pulled from the fabric of our lives. And yet, to the outside world, we maintained the facade of a normal couple, nearing a quarter-century of marriage. One morning, I checked her phone logs while she was in the shower. Sure enough, I saw that man's number repeated over and over. Each call was brief, but the frequency spoke volumes. Again, I said nothing. I was battered by a cold rage and a sense of betrayal so heavy I could barely keep from shaking. But I kept it bottled, simmering under the surface. Her name is Rebecca, my wife, and the man's name, I discovered, was Ray. 45, divorced, no kids, a marketing specialist at some event company. She met him through her job, presumably while planning one of those corporate parties or concerts. He was younger than her, but not by much, just enough to feed her desire for novelty. I tried to imagine how it started. Maybe a conversation about some band they were scheduling. Maybe a casual coffee break that turned into a lingering lunch. The mind reels at all the small steps that lead to an affair, the cautious towing of lines you once vowed never to cross. I had my first direct confrontation with Ray. Unintentional. 6 months after that night, I saw the photos. I was leaving the building where my insurance firm rents an entire floor of offices. Rain hammered the sidewalk. He stood under the narrow overhang, half shielded from the downpour, fiddling with his phone. Rebecca was nowhere in sight. Our eyes met, and there was a flicker of recognition, though we had never been formally introduced. Even so, I knew who he was. He might have guessed who I was too, my posture, my controlled expression. I walked past him, shoulders tense, heartbeat spiking. He nodded politely, as one might to a stranger. My jaw clenched, but I forced myself not to react. The rain pelted me as I stepped into it, soaking my shirt. I felt the cold wetness seeping in, but it barely registered above the roaring hatred in my mind. By the time I reached my car, my hand shook so badly I almost couldn't fit the key into the lock. I confronted her at home that night. I simply said, "I know about him." She was at the kitchen counter, slicing vegetables for dinner. Her hand paused in midair, the knife glinting under the overhead light. For a moment, I could see her face twitch with a mixture of fear and resignation. Then she placed the knife down, exhaled, and turned to face me. Her voice was calm. "I'm sorry you had to find out this way," she said. It felt rehearsed. I snapped, "That's all you're going to say?" She shook her head. "Michael, let's not do this right now." She tried to continue, but I cut her off, my voice rising unexpectedly. I demanded answers. She stared at me with a detached sadness. "I don't love you anymore," she whispered. "I love him." The words crashed over me like a brutal wave of cold water. I almost laughed at the simplicity of it. 25 years, or was it 24? Reduced to a single, measured statement. We didn't speak for the rest of the night. She slept in the guest room. My mind raced with possibilities of what to do. Kick her out, call a lawyer, break every fragile thing in the kitchen. But I did nothing. Rage suffocated me, but so did the contradictory knowledge that I still loved her, a twisted, desperate love that refused to die. And that only made me despise myself more. Time passed in a grim stalemate. She came and went, sometimes not returning until late. I withdrew into a routine of ignoring her presence, focusing on my job. Meanwhile, I spent hours rummaging through her digital footprint, her laptop, phone records, anything. I was like a man possessed, searching for the final piece of proof that would either incinerate my hope or ignite my fury into definitive action. One evening, I heard her on a phone call in the living room. Her voice was softer than usual, tinged with affection. "Yes," she said. "I'll see you there." A short pause. Then she laughed, a delicate laugh I remembered from our earlier years, the laugh that once made me feel like her hero. I stood in the hallway, eavesdropping like a pathetic stranger in my own home. My blood went hot, and I took a step toward the living room. I don't know what possessed me, some blend of wounded pride and raw jealousy. I expected to find her just talking on the phone, but I rounded the corner and saw something else entirely. She was curled up on the sofa, her blouse slightly undone. One hand was toying with a button near her collarbone, almost absent-mindedly. Her eyes were half closed, lost in the conversation. There was a sensual undertone to her posture and voice. She asked him, "What are you wearing?" And I felt my stomach lurch. Her tone was playful, intimate. My face burned. I wanted to shout. I wanted to yank the phone from her hand. But something pinned me in place, as if crossing the threshold into the living room would push me into some vile reality I couldn't unsee. Her voice dropped lower, a whisper I could barely catch. "I miss you," she breathed. "I wish I could touch you right now." I pressed a hand over my mouth to keep from gasping. My wife was having phone sex, emotionally explicit, conjuring images that neither of us had bothered to share for months, maybe years. I retreated a step, then another, heart pounding like a drum. That was a new level of betrayal, something more intimate than a hidden photo or a guarded text message. It was living, breathing desire, raw and immediate. I left the house entirely, walked in the cold night air, and wandered aimlessly. By the time I returned, the lights were off, and she was asleep, or pretending to be. I lay in bed, my mind spinning with the horrifying new detail. My own wife was fantasizing about another man's body while in our shared living room. We once had that spark between us. Now it was gone, co-opted by someone else, and replaced with a glacial emptiness toward me. In the weeks that followed, I discovered she had actually spent nights in a hotel with him. I found the receipts buried in her purse, corners folded, as if she tried to hide them, but never got around to throwing them out. They were from a place called Lakeshore Suites, a modest but romantic spot near Lake Michigan. My heart clenched imagining them together there. I pictured her removing her blouse, lying beside him, gazing into his eyes with that same playful warmth she once reserved for me. The jealousy flared, but so did a profound sense of defeat. I wanted to do something, anything, to reclaim my dignity, but I was paralyzed. We had an argument one morning. I still remember the hiss of the coffee machine in the background, steam rising as an incongruous symbol of normalcy. She was about to head out the door, laptop bag over her shoulder, phone in hand. I asked quietly, "Are you seeing him today?" She paused, turning to face me with an exasperated look. "Michael, this is pointless. Why are we doing this?" I pressed on, "Because I still have the right to know if my wife is sleeping with another man." Her eyes blazed with a flicker of anger. "Yes, I am," she said, as if throwing a gauntlet on the floor. "What do you want me to say? That I'll never see him again?" That wouldn't be true. I shook with a repressed rage. "Don't you feel anything?" I demanded. Her expression hardened. "I feel many things, but not for this marriage. Not anymore." She tried to move past me, but I blocked her path. Our gazes locked, the air thick with hostility. I considered yelling, begging, maybe even lashing out physically. Instead, I stepped aside, and she left without a backward glance. The door shut behind her, echoing in the silent hallway. That evening, I found a single piece of paper on the kitchen counter, a typed list of times and dates, all in the near future. She'd scheduled every day of her life for the next month. Work events, weekend getaways with Ray, even a friend's party. A small note read, "Let's coordinate so we don't clash." The arrogance of it. She was so certain of my inaction that she preemptively mapped out the logistics of her affair. I crumpled the paper and hurled it across the room, cursing under my breath, then spent the next hour pacing the living room, bitter and agitated. That was when the seed of revenge began to take root inside me. I realized confrontation got me nowhere but more pain. She was immune to guilt now, or at least adept at hiding any trace of it. So I withdrew from direct battles and planned a quieter approach. My revenge wouldn't be dramatic or violent. I wasn't going to humiliate her in public or cause a scene. I didn't want an audience, and I had no interest in a meltdown that would only degrade my own dignity. Instead, I recalled something she once mentioned about an assistant or deputy. The word she used, at the concert hall where she worked. A younger woman who admired me from a distance, or so Rebecca had teased after a work event some time ago. We talked briefly once, maybe. She was polite, seemed bright-eyed, probably in her mid-30s. It was a vague memory, but the idea stuck. If Rebecca had chosen her path, then so would I. I reached out to this woman. Her name was Sarah, and we began talking. At first, it was a casual conversation about an upcoming event. She was taken aback, but not unpleasantly so. I sensed from her tone that she was curious why I had suddenly contacted her. I didn't bring up my marital issues. We chatted about mundane topics, local restaurants, the unpredictability of Chicago weather, small jokes about the nature of corporate events. Over time, I sensed a subtle warmth. We exchanged phone calls here and there. I wasn't sure if I was trying to court her or simply drowning my anguish in the comfort of someone else's voice, but I knew it felt good to be acknowledged, to be seen. Perhaps it was petty or shallow, but it gave me a spark of self-worth I'd been missing. One day, I discovered more photos on Rebecca's laptop. New ones, taken just the previous weekend. She tried to delete them again, but I knew exactly where to look. I stared at the images of her and Ray, half-dressed, the bed sheets tangled around their legs, her hair messy in a way that once belonged to our mornings together. I felt a surge of anger so intense that my hands trembled around the edges of the screen. But this time, the anger was tempered by a chilling resolve. I calmly closed the laptop, walked into our bedroom, and started packing an overnight bag with a few essentials. She was out, likely with him. I left a short note on the counter, something like, "I won't be here tonight. Don't wait up." Then I drove downtown, booked a room at a mid-range hotel. I could have stayed with a friend, but I needed solitude to plan my next steps. That night, lying in the scratchy hotel sheets, I realized I wasn't helpless. We had a long marriage, assets, shared property, a lifetime of connections. If she wanted to blow it all up, I'd let her, but on my terms. I was done waiting for an explanation or an apology that would never come. My revenge would be my absolute freedom from the guilt, the anguish, the illusions of a love that had turned sour. By the time we hit the big office party, the same environment where I first caught that dismissive look, things had escalated behind the scenes. I'd begun to quietly move money around, consolidate accounts, prepare for a possible separation. She was almost daring me to do it, I think. But ironically, that party was also the setting of our final public appearance as a married couple. Everyone assumed we were still mostly fine, though maybe they caught a chill in the air. I kept a stoic face, offering polite conversation. She looked radiant, ironically enough, in a deep blue dress, her hair pinned back. I caught her texting more than once, presumably Ray. She didn't bother to hide it anymore. Sometime before midnight, we found ourselves alone at a side table, half-eaten slices of cake in front of us. The DJ's music was distant now, overshadowed by the hush of a crowd that had thinned out. The swirling lights made her eyes appear almost colorless. I asked, voice steady, "Do you remember how many years we've been married?" She arched an eyebrow. 25, she answered, curt. "Right," I said quietly. "And they mean nothing to you now, do they?" She opened her mouth to speak, but I cut her off again. "It's fine," I said, pushing back my chair, standing up. "I'm done asking." She stared at me in surprise, as though expecting another argument or a plea, but I offered neither. I simply turned and walked away. In that moment, I felt a surge of finality. All the heartbreak was condensing into a single decisive action. I grabbed my coat and left the venue, ignoring a couple of acquaintances who tried to wave me over. Outside, the heavy clouds unleashed a downpour, cold and stinging against my face. I trudged to my car, letting the rain soak my hair, my shirt. My hands were steadier than they'd been in months. The next morning, I put all my plans into motion. I had already consulted a lawyer, discreetly. My finances were nearly sorted. I told my boss I needed some personal time. Then I picked up the phone and called Sarah. The conversation was brief, just a proposition for coffee. She agreed. She seemed almost happy to say yes. A quiet exhilaration replaced my bitterness. I wasn't looking for love, not in the romantic sense, but I wanted a companion for the next stage of whatever my life was becoming. If nothing else, I wanted to feel that I had the power to choose my own path. The memory of Rebecca's coldness fueled that desire like a gust of wind feeding a small flame. When Rebecca found out I was seeing someone, she must have guessed or heard rumors. She confronted me in the house one last time. It was evening, the shadows long in the hallway. I'd just come home from my first weekend away with Sarah. The moment Rebecca heard me set my suitcase down, she stormed out of the kitchen, the overhead lights throwing harsh angles across her face. "Where were you?" she demanded. I shrugged off my jacket. "Out of town," I said simply, refusing to elaborate. "With her?" she asked, her voice taut. I just stared back, unblinking. "Yes," I answered. "Why do you care?" She sputtered, as if offended by my calm. "You can't just..." She hesitated, searching for the right words. "You can't just vanish for days without explanation." I gave a hollow laugh. "Kind of how you've been vanishing for half a year now." She looked at me with a mix of anger and something that could have been regret, though it was faint. "We're not done here," she said, stepping closer. I backed away, holding up a hand. "Actually, we are." My voice sounded cold, even to my own ears. "I got no reason to keep pretending. I'm filing the papers." The hush in the hallway was absolute. She took a breath. For a moment, I thought she might say something heartfelt, that perhaps this betrayal had lost its thrill for her now that I was leaving. But she just nodded, crossing her arms. "Fine," she said, a quiver in her tone. "Do what you want." I waited, hoping for some flicker of the woman I once knew. But all I saw was a stranger. So I turned my back on her and walked into the bedroom to gather a few more things. She didn't follow. The final confrontation came on a night marked by yet another storm. The heavens seemed determined to drench the city each time we neared a turning point. I was in the process of moving out. We had sold the big car, closed the joint accounts, the typical steps of separation. The doorbell rang around 9 o'clock. I opened it to find Ray on the doorstep, hair slicked from the rain, jaw set in determination. It took me a moment to register that he had come here, to my house. I stared at him with a tight-lipped expression. "What do you want?" I asked, voice low. He cleared his throat. "I'm here to pick up Rebecca," he said, as though that was the most normal thing in the world. My teeth clenched. "You do realize this is still my home, right?" He shifted uncomfortably. "She asked me to come." Behind me, Rebecca appeared, wearing a coat and carrying a small overnight bag. She looked at me without expression, then at Ray, motioning for him to step inside. The audacity of it was staggering. They exchanged a glance, as though deciding if they should explain themselves to me or simply leave. I think I expected some violent confrontation, but in that moment I felt only numb contempt. She lifted her chin. "We're going away for the weekend," she said. "I didn't expect you to be here." I let out a breath, glancing around at the half-packed boxes. "I'm leaving," I said quietly. "For good. The papers are coming Monday." Ray shifted his weight. He looked uncomfortable, probably realizing how callous this all was. But he was in too deep to back out. I stepped aside, letting them walk past me into the living room. She set her bag down momentarily, rummaging for something she forgot. I just stood there near the front door, taking in the surreal scene. My wife, or soon-to-be ex-wife, about to head off on a trip with her lover, right in front of me. In that space of seconds, 1,000 regrets and memories flashed through my mind. Our early days, her warm laughter, her unwavering support when I changed jobs, the long nights of gentle talk about our future. Then I saw the hollow woman she'd become, or maybe always was, and I felt a pang of sorrow for what I still couldn't deny. I loved her once, maybe still did, in a bruised and battered way. But that love had nowhere to go. It had bled out, leaving only a vacant ache. She found whatever she'd been looking for, a charger, I think, and turned to me. Our eyes met. For a second, there was a glimmer of something like hesitation, as though she might speak. Then Ray touched her elbow, and the moment passed. They stepped toward the door, brushing by me. Rebecca paused on the threshold, not quite able to turn fully toward me. "Take care, Michael," she said in a subdued tone. I opened my mouth but found no words. The door clicked shut behind them, and I stood in the empty house, listening to the distant sound of their footsteps fade into the night rain. I can't say I felt victorious. Revenge rarely feels like triumph. Sometimes it's just an empty resolution to a battle you never wanted. I spent the weekend finishing my move, hauling boxes into a rented storage unit, making phone calls to finalize a new place for myself. The next time I heard from Rebecca was through a typed document delivered by her attorney, a formality acknowledging the property division we discussed. It all happened with cold efficiency. My phone rang a couple of times, but it was only spam or a coworker checking on me. I let each call ring out, not caring to speak to anyone. Sarah and I kept in touch. We met more often, and though I'd like to say it was an effortless romance, the truth is more complicated. I was wounded and raw, and she was cautious, not wanting to be a rebound. But we found a surprising comfort in each other's company, enough to make me see that I could still live, still feel the warmth of human connection without drowning in bitterness. My revenge, if you can call it that, was simply refusing to give Rebecca the satisfaction of my breakdown. I didn't chase her or beg for her return. I just let her watch me walk away, carrying the fragments of what remained of my dignity. One cold, wind-whipped afternoon, I sat on a lonely bench by the lakeshore, looking out over the steel-gray water. The sky was a mosaic of clouds, and the waves slapped against the concrete barriers with a steady rhythm that felt almost like a heartbeat. My phone buzzed, and I saw a message from Sarah asking if I was free for dinner. I typed back a simple yes, then slipped the phone into my coat pocket. Sitting there, I realized the full weight of what had happened. 25 years, or was it 24? The timeline hardly mattered anymore. I felt the finality of it like a heavy door slamming shut. And yet, there was a thin thread of hope weaving through the wreckage. I was free now, in a way that terrified me, but also offered the faint promise of a new beginning. I never asked Rebecca if she regretted it. She never asked me if I forgave her. Maybe the answers were too obvious. Sometimes, it's best to let the final words remain unspoken. We had unraveled too far, each stepping over the lines we once swore to respect. She'd chosen Ray. I'd chosen to reclaim my life on my own terms. That was the parting arrangement. In that sense, we both got what we wanted, or at least what we believed we wanted. So here I am, some months later, telling this story with a voice that still carries the echo of disbelief. Part of me can't believe I'm not screaming, or sobbing, or lashing out. But the truth is, my sorrow has settled into a quiet, measured ache that runs deeper than any outward display. Like standing at the edge of a grave, knowing the casket is sealed, the earth waiting to be filled in. You can't change what's inside that box. You can only let it sink. In my new life, I've learned that endings aren't always neat. Sometimes they're abrupt, or messy, or drenched in regret. Other times, they're just a slow extinguishing of a once roaring flame. Rebecca and I never had a grand, tragic confrontation with tears and broken glass. We just disintegrated. That might be the cruelest kind of ending. No dramatic final. Just two people letting go of each other's hands in the midst of a storm. I still see her face in my memories, the way she used to be before the distance set in. And it's painful because it reminds me of all the possibility that rotted away. But I can't cling to what was. She made a choice, and then so did I. Maybe one day I'll reach a place of genuine peace. For now, I exist in a state of cautious equilibrium, stepping forward one day at a time, carrying the wounds that remind me of what love can turn into when neglected or taken for granted. They say time heals everything. But that's a lie told by people who want to believe in a kinder universe. Time doesn't heal on its own. It merely dulls the sharp edges. The scar remains, a testament to the wreckage you survived. My marriage is that scar, an echo of a once sacred promise that neither of us kept. Even so, I don't hate her. Sometimes, in the bleak hours before dawn, I realize I still love the woman she was, or the memory of her. But that doesn't mean I take her back. It's too far gone. If she and Ray are happy, I can't say it matters. If they're not, well, that's hardly my concern anymore. My life belongs to me again. And if I stand at the grave of our relationship and feel tears threaten to rise, that's all right. It's a funeral, after all. But once I step away from that plot of earth, I let the shovel fall, and I walk on. Maybe that's the only real victory we can claim after betrayal. The capacity to move forward without letting the bitterness eat us alive. In the end, I suppose there's a simple resolution to all this pain. I chose to leave rather than fight a war that was already lost. There's a certain power in that. A quiet power, perhaps, but it's mine. I'll carry that cold, final day in my memory for as long as I live. The day I saw her turn away for good, the day I answered with silence instead of fury, the day I realized there was no place left for me by her side. And in that hollow stillness, I found an ending as sure as a nail sealed in the coffin of our love. That's the story. I left, and I survived. Maybe that's all that needs to be said. But if anyone ever asks me how a marriage dies after more than 2 decades, I'll say it doesn't die in a flash of violence or a sudden blowout. It dies in the slow accumulation of small betrayals, in the glances that tell you you're no longer wanted, in the phone calls late at night that you were never meant to hear. And when you finally see the truth, you bury it like a broken vow, and you learn to breathe again. The rest is just paperwork and echoing footsteps in an empty house. As for me, I'll keep breathing, keep walking away from that open grave, and trust that one day, the air won't feel so cold on my lungs.